Okay, part 3, sorry about that. This gentleman was before me, the professor pointed out politely. And what can I do for you? The cashier asked Mr. Grundyce. I want some change, please. The thief replied. Will you give me pound notes for this £5? Oh, and £2 worth of silver. He handed across the counter first a £5 note and then 2 single pounds, all of which he took out of his pocket. The cashier picked them up and opened his cash drawer. Wait a moment, cried the professor. That's stolen money. What? Exclaimed the cashier, looking at the boy in astonishment. The clerks at their desks behind him stopped adding up their long columns of figures, and their heads jerked up as though they'd been bitten by a snake. That money doesn't belong to this gentleman, said the professor. He stole it from a friend of mine, and he only wants change in order to get rid of the notes in case they are found on him. What impudence! Impudence meaning rudeness. What impudence, said Mr. Grundyce loudly, and added to the cashier, Excuse me, there's only one answer to that kind of thing. He raised his hand and gave the professor a resounding slap in the face. That won't help you, said the professor, and punched Mr. Grundyce in the stomach so hard that he had to hold on to the counter. The bank clerks all got to their feet and came over to see what was happening. Then Gustav honked loudly 3 times on his horn, and the manager stormed out of his private room just as 10 boys, with Emil as their head, burst through the doors and closed in on Mr. Grundyce. What on earth's going on here? Demanded the manager. These young scoundrels have had the impertinence to say I stole some money, which I'd just come in here to change, Mr. Grundyce explained, literally shaking with anger. And so you did, Emil cried, jumping up. He stole it from me yesterday afternoon, a £5 note and £2 notes. We were in the train from Neustadt to Berlin and I'd fallen asleep. Can you prove it? Asked the cashier sternly. I've been in Berlin all a week, put in Bowler Hat, now smiling politely. I was busy in the city all day yesterday, from morning until night. It's not true, it's a lie, Emil shouted, almost crying with anger. Can you prove that this gentleman is the one who travelled in the train with you? Asked the manager severely. Of course he can't, said the thief scornfully. If he was alone in the train with him, of course he wouldn't have any witnesses, remarked one of the clerks, and Emil's friends glanced anxiously at one another. I can produce a witness, though, Emil suddenly remembered delightedly. Mrs. Jacob from Gross-Grunau. She was in the compartment when I got in, though she got out quite soon afterwards. She asked me to remember her to Mr. Kerschel's in Neustadt, where I live. I must ask you to produce an alibi then, the manager said to the thief. Can you do that? Naturally, an alibi, okay, it's the story that you would have to say to prove that you were somewhere, okay? So if you're being, let's say, you are accused of robbing a bank, for instance, all right, on Tuesday afternoon. If you can prove that you were somewhere else on Tuesday afternoon, if somebody else saw you doing something else completely different, then that gets you off the hook, doesn't it? You can prove that it wasn't you robbing the bank because you have an alibi. You've got proof that you were somewhere else. I must ask you to produce an alibi then, the manager said to the thief. Can you do that? Naturally. I'm staying at the Hotel Cried across the road. Yeah, but only since yesterday evening, Gustav pointed out. I know because I've been there, disguised as a lift boy, practically ever since he took the room. At that, a smile seemed to pass over the faces of the bank clerks. They were beginning to be on the side of the boys. Well, sir, said the manager, I'm afraid we shall have to keep the money here for the time being, Mr. And he reached for paper to write down particulars of all that had happened. His name is Grundyce, Emil informed the manager. At that, the man in the bowler hat laughed loudly. My name is Müller, he said. They've made a mistake, you see. What lies he tells, Emil exclaimed furiously. He told me himself in the train that his name was Grundyce. Have you any papers to prove who you are? Asked the cashier quietly. Not with me, unfortunately, said the thief, but if you can wait a minute, I'll fetch them from my hotel. Don't trust him, screamed Emil. It's my money and I must have it back. Yes, but even if what you say is true, said the cashier, it can't be done as easily as that. How can you prove it really was your money? Did you make a note of the numbers or write your name on the back of the notes? No, of course I didn't, Emil replied indignantly. I've never dreamed of it being stolen from me. But it is mine, all the same. My mother gave it to me to bring to my grandmother who lives here in Berlin at 15 Schumann Street. Did you happen to notice if any of the notes were marked or damaged in any way? Suggested the cashier helpfully. Emil shook his head. No, I didn't. Gentlemen, said the thief, I give you my word of honour that the money is mine. Do I look the kind of chap who would steal from a child? Emil suddenly gave a jump. Wait a bit, he cried, enormous relief in his voice. I've thought of something. In the train, I pinned the envelope with the money to the inside of my pocket, so there ought to be holes pricked through all the 3 notes. There was a gasp, and then silence, while the cashier held the money up to the light. The thief took a sly step backwards. The manager was drumming nervously on the counter with his fingers. The boy's right, said the cashier, quite pale from the strain. There are, in fact, pinpricks through all these notes. And here's the pin that made them, added Emil triumphantly, laying the pin on the counter. I pricked myself with it too. At this, the thief turned round and, quick as lightning, shoved away through the boys so violently that several stumbled and fell over. Then he bolted through the door and was gone. Okay, I shall stop there. Okay, it's good, isn't it? I'll see you tomorrow. Okay, bye everyone.